The National Intelligence Council released an unclassified report earlier this month assessing foreign threats to the 2020 presidential election. The report ultimately found foreign entities like China and Iran did attempt to influence the election, but it was Russian intelligence that most succeeded in spreading disinformation campaigns. A new report in The Atlantic examines how it wasn't just the climate created by former President Trump that made America more vulnerable to these types of attacks. Anne Applebaum wrote that article, and she joins me now. She's a staff writer at The Atlantic. Anne, thanks for being here. The NIC report found that the Russians were more focused on what they called compromat during the 2020 presidential election rather than the hack and leak job that they were responsible for in 2016. Explain that to us.
Yes, so what they were doing was putting false stories into the U.S. information ecosystem. And actually, this is something that we could all see happening in real time, so it's not a great surprise. A Russian intelligence officer called Andrei Derkach, who's very close to Rudy Giuliani, was helping him to place information about the Biden family and their supposed corrupt links to Ukraine into the U.S. media. There was a documentary done on the OANN network that used this information extensively. That's the one that in the Intelligence Council report. That it's clear that that's the documentary they're talking about. There were some other instances as well. There was the strange laptop that was found with information about Hunter Biden on it, and a few others. Those aren't mentioned directly. But the point is that a series of Russians helped Giuliani and others get these stories into the media, and then they simply counted on Americans to promote the stories, to push them and to promote them.
Well, you write about reflexive control and how it's applied in politics. What are we doing as Americans that makes it so easy for foreign entities to manipulate us?
So reflexive control is a very old Russian doctrine going back to the Soviet era. And it's really the science of trying to get your opponents to make mistakes. So it's different from normal disinformation. It's the study of, I mean, you can imagine how it's used in a military circumstance. You study where your opponent is getting his information from, and then you seek to change the information so that his conclusions are then wrong. What the Russians do in US politics is not that different. In other words, they've figured out that we have these weaknesses. We have forms of media that will take information and gossip and fake documents from anywhere. They don't check the sources, and then they'll promote them and use them as part of an election campaign. So what we're doing wrong is accepting this information, not checking it, not asking where it comes from, not asking who's supplying it, why are they supplying it, and then taking it seriously and pushing it onward. A version of that was also done in 2016, but it was much clearer in 2020 that this was that this was the tactic that was being used rather than hacking democratic or other institutions.
Are there things that lawmakers can be doing to better protect Americans and American democracy in further elections, especially when it seems like it's incumbent on all of us to not spread this misinformation, but I don't see any real stops being put on the way that we all share things and don't question enough some of these sources that are unreliable?
No, I mean, look, as long as there are media outlets in the United States that are not bothered by the source of fake stories and are happy to promote them, then yes, it's difficult to know how to control it. I mean, there is a role for the FBI, and I do worry that the FBI in the Trump years was cowed and was afraid to investigate these kinds of stories. I mean, when you have an intelligence officer like Derkach, or there's another one mentioned in the story who was actually figured in the report, who figured in the Mueller investigation as well. When you have people like that acting, cooperating with U.S. citizens like Giuliani and others, I don't see why the FBI can't initiate a counterintelligence investigation and seek to seek to stop people who are obviously cooperating with Russian sources. The FBI has been cowed, though. They've been afraid. They don't want to appear political. This isn't the kind of thing that used to be done by counterintelligence officers. They used to be looking for spies who were trying to steal facts and not spies who were trying to plant information in politics. And so changing the way they think about what counterintelligence is and should be would be a start. But at the end of the day, it's incumbent on all of us to ask where our news is coming from, who's providing it to us, and why.
Right. I think that's where it becomes especially difficult, particularly when politicians or people who have something to gain, even if it's just their own reaffirmation of their mindset, are benefited by these false stories. Trying to tamp that down seems to be a monumental task. And any sense of how our society can move on when we know that this is actually happening.
So it's true. President Trump set the precedent. He, in 2016, publicly called for Russian help in the campaign. Russia, if you're listening, you'll be rewarded if you help me. And Russia was indeed, as he probably knew already, hacking. Had hacked material and was going to release it in an attempt to discredit Hillary Clinton. But you're right. It will require a sea change and a different mindset on the part of politicians and journalists and ordinary voters to ask yourself where the news is coming from. Why is it shaped this way? Who's the origin of this story? I mean, the laptop story about Hunter Biden was classic. I mean, to this day, we don't really know whose laptop it is, where it came from, how it appeared in this strange situation. I mean, those of you who remember it, may have asked yourselves that. But then, it was really the fault of the New York Post that then decided to print the information on it without being sure what it was. So it's really the job of journalists to stop. To stop taking information like that, to draw lines, to say we're not going to allow ourselves to be manipulated. And it's up to, as I said, it's up to voters and readers and people who are on social media to make the same decisions. I mean, that's ultimately what democracy is going to have to be, is people taking more responsibility for what information they pass on and what they read.
All right, Ann, thank you very much.